networking compliance status of your system, Skyview will install, configure, schedule these reports to run, and all you really have to do is check your email. So if you're interested, please let us know. Again, this is configuring IBM iSeries access servers to use SSL. Today's host is Skyview co-founder and president, security expert Carol Woodbury. With that, Carol, are you available?
I am.
Okay, well, let's get started. Thank you all for attending. You should have the ball now.
All right. Can you see my screen?
I can. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for joining me. This is a popular topic, and a lot of it is driven by a lot of the laws and regulations that are coming into play today. There's a lot of requirements, especially through the payment card industry, to make sure that administrators are connecting to the systems via an SSL connection, or for those users that have full decrypt capabilities to see the cardholder data. And the real reason is because you don't want your user ID and password sniffed throughout your network. And in a lot of cases, depending on the interface that you're using, that user ID and password does flow in clear text, and so it's easily sniffed. And the reason that you want those administrators and those people with full decrypt capabilities to be connecting via SSL is obviously those are the user IDs that can compromise that PCI data. So given that that's the requirement, how do you actually accomplish that? So that's what this presentation is about. So the agenda is going to talk just a little bit about how SSL works. If I don't explain that, it won't be as obvious why you have to do all the components that you have to configure. We'll talk about these things called certificate authorities. That's who actually issues the certificates that you will use. We'll talk about using the thing called Digital Certificate Manager, and that's how you manage and assign certificates to the servers on the IBM I. We'll talk about how you can configure HTTP. That's about a one-slide slide to use these certificates. The main focus will be configuring the IBM iSeries access servers to use an SSL connection. And then some considerations about how you might want to actually use this function going forward. Okay, so when you have an SSL connection, what is actually happening is that the client is making a request to the server. So the client could be your iSeries Navigator session is making a request up to the iSeries. It could be a Telnet session initiating a request. It could be a web browser, but something on the client or on your PC is making a request for a connection to the iSeries. And they're making it, and it says that it has to be a secure connection. So the way that SSL works is that the server has to authenticate itself, meaning it has to tell the client who it is, and the client has to trust the method of identification that the server is providing. So it's kind of like you go to the airport and you hand the security people your license, and they're looking for a valid driver's license. I don't know if you've flown recently, but you're either using a driver's license or a passport, and they scan over it to see the image to make sure that it hasn't been counterfeited. So they are trusting the person handing the identification. Same sort of thing, the server has to hand back to the client a piece of identification to say, trust me. Okay, so the way that does that is that the client will send up a piece of information that says, hey server, encrypt this, and send it back to me along with your digital certificate. So the server will send back this information encrypted with its private key, send back the digital certificate, and if the client trusts who issued that certificate, then the connection will be made. And the interesting part about an SSL connection, people are sometimes worried about the performance aspects. Well, the part of the SSL connection that really has a performance impact is just this negotiation or this handshake part. Once it has done this handshake, there's session keys that get exchanged, and so it's a very fast algorithm that does an encryption of the actual flow of the data from then on. So it's really just that initiation piece that takes the time. Okay, so here it is visually. You can have a client, and it's IBM Access. It's some sort of browser or some manner of client request, and it comes up to the iSeries. And the iSeries then says, oh, I've got to provide a, this is supposed to be a secure session, so the client wants to prove who I am and know who I am. So what the iSeries will do at this point is take the certificate that has been assigned to that server, so this is a digital certificate right down here, and it will take that digital certificate and pass it back on the flow back to the client. Now what the client has to do, it takes a look at this digital certificate, and the client has this thing called a list of trusted signers. And basically all it is a list of certificate authorities that it trusts. So it's basically a list of the certificate authorities that if a certificate is passed back, if one of these certificate authorities is in the list, then it will trust the digital certificate that has been passed to it. Now, this list of trusted signers, the way that IBM ships client access or iSeries access, is that in the client itself, it already is pre-primed, or it ships with a list of these trusted signers. And in that list is this thing, there are a list of CA certificate authorities, and they're called well-known certificate authorities. And these well-known certificate authorities actually are listed in not just iSeries Access, but if you open up your browser and look at the certificate authorities from there, regardless of the type of browser, the browsers have this list of trusted signers as well. So it's companies like VeriSign or Thought, but there's a number of them actually. Now, another thing that can be in that list of trusted signers is a private CA, or in this case, we're going to make the iSeries be a certificate authority. So then you would have the certificate authority listed in your trusted signers list on the client as well. So the real question that you have to answer when you're starting out on a project like this is, who is going to issue the certificate that is assigned to the servers on the IBM I? And there's a couple things that you need to consider about who is going to issue this certificate. So the entity that will issue the certificate, first of all, that entity is called a certificate authority. Okay? And a certificate authority has to be trusted by the client. In this case, it's the client that has to trust the certificate authority, or else that transmission of the encrypted data, that handshake, will never occur. Okay? It will never complete. So to be trusted, that certificate authority has to be in the client's list of trusted signers. So if you take a look at Internet Explorer and go under, you can see that list of trusted signers under, and it's called Trusted Root Certification Authorities. If you're using Firefox, you can look under Certificate Manager and look under the authorities there, and you'll see that list. In iSeries Access, they're called signer certificates. So that's where what the different terminology is, and that's where these lists are located. Now, when should you use a well-known, like a certificate authority like VeriSign, versus a private CA, like creating your iSeries to be a certificate authority. There's several considerations to make here. When you use a well-known or a public certificate authority, that certificate authority is in your client's list of trusted signers by default. So iSeries Access ships with numerous, and browsers ship with a number of these well-known CAs. So the reason that you would want to use, or the cases where you would definitely want to use a well-known CA versus a private CA, is for a public website. So if you have, say you're in retail and you're going to have a new website to do retail, you would want to use a public CA because anybody that's connecting to you would automatically in that browser have one of these public CAs in its list of trusted signers. You've probably at some point or another made a connection to a website and you get this error message that says, the error message would say something to the effect of certificate not trusted. So you would never want to do that when you want the general public to connect to your website, because it just presents a really bad image to the people that are connecting. So you'd use it for public websites. The other way that you would use it, reason that you would probably use it, is for a full rollout throughout your entire enterprise. It's a little painful, and there's some considerations to make if you're going to make all of your users SSL connections, because getting one of these private CAs into your client, into the client access client in particular, can be a little painful if you're going to do it for the masses. So usually in that case, if it's a full, complete rollout, you're usually going to spend more time configuring the PCs to include the CA than it would be worth paying the money to purchase a server certificate from a well-known CA. So again, the downside to this is that a certificate issued by a well-known CA has to be purchased. That's really not that much money. It's certainly, depending on where you get it from, somewhere between $300 and $700 the last time I priced them. So the other thing is that, okay, so that's the well-known CA. And then you have the flip side, which is this private certificate authority. Now, in this case, the certificate authority will not be in your client's list of trusted signers, so you have to get it there somehow. And we'll talk about how you do that. It's really good for a limited rollout or for a proof of concept because you're not paying for it, or if you are, it's a very limited fee. And so it's really, really good for if you're only going to enable a handful of administrators, or again for a proof of concept. So those are a few of the considerations. Now I do want to say that the handouts will be made available in a few days after this session is over, and so you don't have to scramble to get all this down. So just for that. Now let's start looking at the configuration and what's required to create a certificate authority on the iSeries. So we're going to go through two scenarios. We're going to first go through the scenario where you make your iSeries a certificate authority, and we're going to go through the scenario where you request a certificate from a well-known CA, and then we'll show you how to use both of those. So the requirements that you have to have DCM, Digital Certificate Manager, installed. The IBM HTTP server, who doesn't install that these days, I don't know. The HTTP admin instance does have to be started, and you will want to sign on to DCM with a profile that has both all object and SecAdmin, or you're not going to be able to see the options that you need to get this configured properly. You can sign on to it, but you will not be able to see exactly what you want to see. Now, when you look at a certificate authority, it will issue different types of certificates. So there's various types. One of them is a server certificate, and that's what you would assign to the telnet server. Another one is called an object signing certificate, and another one is a certificate that can be assigned to a specific user, and that user would use that as an authentication method, sort of like your user ID and password. Instead, you would use a certificate to do that. And the other thing is that a certificate authority will issue a certificate that represents itself, basically, and this is what gets imported into that list of trusted signers if it's not there already. So the two types of certificates that we're going to really focus on today are the certificate authority certificate and the server certificate. I'm going to ignore these other two today. Okay, so before you can configure the iSeries access servers to use an SSL connection, you have to first get a server assigned to the telnet server and any other server that you want to make an SSL connection to. And you have two options. Again, you can either get your certificate from a well-known CA, or the option we're going to discuss first is that you're going to use, configure your IBM I as the CA. So the steps we're going to go through is that we're going to sign into Digital Certificate Manager. We're going to first create the certificate authority. We're going to create that CA certificate because that's, again, what goes into the list of trusted signers. We'll create a server certificate, and that's what actually gets assigned to the actual server itself. And then we'll assign it, and we'll import that CA certificate to the clients. Okay, so here we go. Now, I could be really a crazy woman this morning, but we are going to do this live. And the handouts will have all the screenshots that we go through. But I just got new hardware and got it configured yesterday, and so we're going to do this attempt and do it live. All right, so to get to DCM, we're going on a v6r1 system right now. To get to DCM, if you are continuing to run in 5.4, or you had used DCM before that, what you did was to put the name of your system :2001. And that still works when you get to v6r1, but it's going to redirect you to the IBM director first. So you're going to get this website security certificate. And this is an example of what you would get when the server certificate is not in my list of trusted signers. So what IBM has done is issue a certificate for the IBM director, and it's trying to actually redirect me to an HTTPS or a secure session. So this is exactly an example of what you get when your CA is not in your list of trusted signers. Now, of course, it's warning me to not continue to this website, but we're going to anyway. So now you see that the session has changed to be an HTTPS session. So I accepted that CA certificate, and now it has redirected me to the IBM director. Okay, so I don't have to sign on with QSEC offer, but literally this just got up and running last night. So we don't have a whole lot of user profiles on the system yet. Okay, so you get redirected to the IBM director navigator. And the thing that you want to do is go to this i5OS tests page. And then you can choose Digital Certificate Manager. And then, of course, you have to sign in again because now you're at Digital Certificate Manager. Oops. Helps to type in the right password. Okay, so now if you're at v5r1, you can see we're back at this 2001. Or I'm sorry, if you're at v5r4. If you're at v5r4, you're just going to come directly you're going to get a list of things to choose, and then you come directly to this. So slightly different screen flow at 5.4 than it is at 6.1 and 7.1. Once you hit this screen, it's the same flow regardless of what release you're on. Okay, so what we're going to do first is create a certificate authority. So what I'm doing is making my iSeries or IBM I be able to issue certificates. Right? So I'm going to give this certificate store a password. And it's good to remember that. You can reset these passwords, but it's good to remember it. Okay, Skyview Certificate Authority. Organization name and state or province. Now I have found out that sometimes this gets really fussy, not so much when your iSeries is a CA, but when you're requesting this from a well-known CA, sometimes you have to spell out your state. Now you have to do a minimum of 3 characters, but sometimes you have to spell it out. Okay, scroll down a little bit. The validity period, I just bumped this up to be the maximum. If I left it at the minimum, I would have to renew my server certificates more often, and I don't want to do that. Okay, so I now have created a certificate authority and in my local certificate authority store. So if I wanted to, I could install this CA into my list of trusted signers in my browser. So I can just click on that, and I can open this and install the certificate. Just keep on going. Okay, and my import. Now I have it in my list of trusted signers on my browser. So we'll continue. Now that install the certificate on my browser, the only reason I really need to do that is if I want to make SSL connections from a browser. But if you are only doing SSL connections from iSeries Access, you can totally skip what I just did. It's not going to hurt anything, but it's not a necessary part of the configuration for client access or iSeries Access. Okay, so now we have to define some of the policies about this certificate authority. So am I going to allow this certificate authority to issue user certificates? Well, I really don't plan to issue user certificates out of here, but it doesn't hurt anything to say yes. And how long are the certificates going to be valid that this certificate authority issues? I tend to make this the maximum length so I don't have to worry about renewing those certificates. So again, just some policy about the type and the longevity of the certificates being issued by this certificate authority. And this certificate authority is my iSeries. All right. So I have successfully created the certificate authority and changed the policy data. Now what I can do is I can assign the certificate authority or add this certificate authority to the list of trusted signers. And the reason I would want to do that is when the iSeries is acting as a client. Okay, this is not where I want to, this will not help me in my iSeries Access configuration for SSL sessions. This step will help me if I'm going to do client authentication at any time. And again, it's not going to hurt anything to go ahead and choose this, so I can select all. So basically, whenever there's a client situation, for instance, if I was going to require client authentication on a telnet connection, not just a server authentication, but the server then has to trust the client, then I can say, oh, I want to assign this certificate. So I'm going to continue that. Okay, so I've assigned that. So if a client certificate is issued by the CA, now those servers are going to trust that certificate. Now I can also say that the certificate authority can issue object signing certificates. And again, we're not going to focus on that type of certificate today, but it doesn't hurt to say, okay, fine, it can issue object signing certificates. So we'll just say that the label is Skyview object. Okay. You have to fill in everything that says required, or it won't like it. Okay, so we just press continue, and okay again, and now we can issue certificates from this iSeries. Okay, so what we're going to do now is to select the certificate store, and we're going to select the system one. And so now I have, okay, let me go back here. We select the certificate store. If I wanted to work with this local CA authority and maybe go in and change the policies, maybe say, no, I don't want to issue user certificates, or if I need to work with the CA itself, I would choose the local or the CA store. If I want to work with other types of certificates, then I'd say the system one. And that's where we're going to create the server certificate that we assign that will allow us to make the SSL connections from iSeries Access. So we're just going to set the current certificate store basically to be the system store. All right, so now we come back over to the left-hand side here, and we open this thing called Manage Certificates. And we're going to say, I want to create a certificate. Well, okay, wrong path here. Create a new certificate store, install the local CA. There we go, manage their certificate store. Okay. Where's my create? I must have applications. Nope. All right, I'm going to go back and say select the local CA. Okay, and now I should get create a certificate. There we go. All right, so go back there and say you need to work with the local CA and then do the create certificate. So we'll continue here. Now when I clicked on create certificate, it says create certificate. And what I want to do is not a user, not an object, but I want to create a server certificate. Okay, and this is what we're going to assign to the server so that when the client requests a secure communication, the server has a digital certificate to send back to the client. So this is the server certificate that we are creating right now. So again, I'm just going to call this SSL. Whoops, nope, this is not it. Nope, okay, this says I should have read. Server or client certificate for another system running i5OS. That's the wrong one. So, all right, I have lost my way. So we're going to go back to the presentation because it will tell us where I've gone astray. All right, there's the sign-on. There we go. I told you, death by demo. So let's get back on track here. This is where we've created the certificate authority. And it should have allowed us to create the server certificate right when it was done. There's the object signing certificate. There we go. Select all, did that. Select the certificate store. All right. Well, let's try this again then. Thought I was on the right track. Oops. Select the certificate store system. I think, there we go. All right. Yes, it did not allow me to assign that certificate. Okay, so what we want to do is go back, and we want to work with, let's work with the CA certificate. All right, so here we've got the local certificate, and that's what it comes out looking like. This is the one we just created. Okay, I'm using a path that I'm not familiar with, so let me go back to the presentation here. My bad for trying to do this live. Okay, so we signed on. We said create a certificate authority. We created the certificate, and here's the certificate authority itself being created. This is the screen we saw where it said install the certificate. And we set the policy data. All right, so we did that. And we viewed the certificate, or I'm sorry, this is the screen that it didn't let us see. Okay, we never got to the point where it said your certificate was created and placed in the system certificate store. So we'll try one more thing. And what we're going to do, actually, is delete the CA. Well, I think we're running out of time, so we're not going to do that. What you should see when you create your certificate is the ability to create a system certificate. And when you do that, you're going to get the option to assign it to all the servers. And you'll know you're on the right screen because you'll see all the client access servers listed there. Now it's probably because since my system was installed, we have not brought down the host servers and brought down the telnet servers. So that's probably why they didn't manifest themselves in here. Okay, so when you create the CA certificate, part of the flow will be to create a server certificate. You want to make sure to take that option, and then you assign that server certificate to all of the servers. So again, you're going to know that you're in the right place because you'll see all the client access servers listed. Okay, so fortunately, the handouts that you'll get will have the right flow. The demo didn't. Okay, so you'd select all of the servers to use that certificate, and even if you don't intend to have an SSL connection to one of those servers, go ahead and assign the certificate. It's not going to hurt anything. So once you've assigned that, then you'll get the option to create that object signing certificate, and that we did go through. And this is the part that we saw as well, where you can assign the CA certificate to the client parts of those servers. Okay. So that's what you have to do to set up iSeries access, or I'm sorry, the iSeries to be a certificate store and a certificate authority. So if you're not going to get a certificate from a well-known CA, you have to go through these steps. Now, you have another option. and that is getting a certificate from a well-known CA. Now, a lot of companies, a lot of you may already have a relationship with someone, some well-known CA. A lot of people, because you may have a publicly facing website, you probably already have a digital certificate from somebody like Thought or VeriSign or one of the other well-known CAs. So what you can do in that case is that you still have to use DCM. So all of those things to log on to DCM still apply. So you log on to DCM, you create a certificate store, a local store, and then you create what's called a server request. And then you send that off to the well-known CA, and they send you back a file, which is in essence the digital certificate, and then you import that. So let's look at the screenshots that represent that flow. I'm not going to be bold or stupid, one or the other, and try to do this live. But this is the certificate, or this is the flow. So again, you're going to log on to DCM just like I showed you before. Now, once you do that, you choose the option to create a new certificate store, because you need a place to put the server certificate when you get it and import it. So you're going to create a new certificate store and choose system. Now, if you have already created a system store, then all you do is take this option here to select a certificate store. You take that option, enter the password, and then you take the option to create a certificate in that certificate store, or you take the option that you'll see on the left-hand side to create a certificate or request a certificate. So yes, you want to create a certificate in the certificate store. Okay, so there you go. And you want to create a, you only have one option at this point in time. Basically, who is going to issue this certificate is what this question is asking. Now, if you had created your iSeries to be a certificate authority, you're going to see another option down here that will list your local CA. But if you're getting it from a well-known CA, you want to take the option that says VeriSign or other Internet Certificate Authority. And then it basically is going to have you fill out a very similar set of information that you did prior through the iSeries flow. Now again, depending on which well-known CA you have, they may have very strict syntax rules to actually do this. So I had to try about 5 times before I could request a test certificate from VeriSign to get this example going. So again, syntax requirements for things like the certificate label. So I couldn't have spaces in my common name or my label, and I had to spell out my state. So just make sure you understand what syntax requirements your CA has when you're making this request, so it doesn't take multiple requests to get it done. Okay, once you choose, fill in all these blanks and you say continue, you're going to get a screen that looks like this, and this is known as the certificate request, or and this is actually what you present then to the CA to get back a digital certificate. Now the key with this, besides making sure that you have the syntax right, the key to this is to make sure that you get the very beginning dash. These dashes are part of the request itself. So you have to make sure and get the beginning and the end, including these beginning and end dashes. Because then you go to a website. Most of the well-known CAs have some type of website, and you literally cut and paste this, what looks to be a really mess, into their request. And what they will do then is process it, and eventually, typically via email, they send you back a file. Now, what you do then is import that file or FTP it up to the IFS. Once you get that back from the well-known CA, you send it up to the IFS, and then you come back to DCM, and you're going to say import certificate, and you're going to import that server or client. And then you select the system store for system and click on import. And that's where you will state the exact path name and the extension of the file that has come back from the well-known CA. And once you import it, then you can go through the same flow of assigning that server certificate to those servers. And again, it will be all of those iSeries access servers that you will see. So you know you're in the right place when you're assigning it there. Okay. So you can see that the flow of getting a certificate and assigning it to the servers is significantly shorter when you're using a well-known CA than when you are using your iSeries as a CA. Okay, so that's how you get a server. That is how you assign a server certificate to the servers. So on the server side, you're done. Now you have to come to your laptop, your PC, the client that is actually going to start these requests and need the SSL connection. Okay, so the best way to do this, or the first thing that you have to do, is to make sure that the SSL is actually installed on the PC. Okay, so I'll show you a couple things. I'm not going to do a live connection here, but I'll show you a couple things. Here's iSeries Navigator. If you right-click on the system name that you're trying to connect with and choose Properties, the easiest way to determine if the client has the SSL installed is that you will see the Secured Sockets tab. If you see it, then you know it's installed on the client. If you don't, you're going to have to go through the selective install and get it installed. So when I click on this tab, if I was using a well-known CA, all I would have to do is say verify SSL connection. But if I was using my iSeries as a CA, then I have to click on download to download that authority. Certificate authority is not installed on the server. Okay, I still have some configuration to do on my systems. Like I say, new hardware just up last night, so I've got some more configuration to do on my end. But what you'll be able to do is, if you're using iSeries as a CA, all you have to do is basically click this download button, and it sucks in that CA certificate right into your client. Now, this is where the configuration considerations come in between using a well-known CA and a private CA or your iSeries as a CA. Because imagine going around and making sure that all of the clients have this configured correctly. So if you're going to use an iSeries as your CA, you obviously either only want to do this for a handful of people, where it's easy to go to their desktops and make sure this gets configured like this and gets the CA into it, or you're going to want to do a new desktop image and make sure that that CA certificate has been imported and then push that out to all of your clients. So a couple things there to consider. Now, what you can do in this case is to say use Secure Sockets Layer for the connection. Once you say that and click that box, in the Properties section under iSeries Navigator, because that's where we are, iSeries Access, once you say and click this, then that's going to be the default connection mechanism for the rest of your client functions. So for ODBC, for Telnet, anything that is iSeries related or iSeries Access related will now use SSL for the default connection once you click this box into the properties. So let me show you a couple other screens here. Okay, so this is the screenshot from the selective install showing that it is, or if you don't have it installed, you have to come in here and click this box to get it installed. Okay, so again, this is just an example of that properties box that I was showing you before. And again, if you are using your iSeries as a C8, you're going to have to download this first, and then you can verify the connection. So when you click on the download, you're going to get a box that looks like this. It's going to pop up and prompt you for a key database password. By default, it's CA400. On every iSeries Access client, the key database password is CA400. Once you click OK, it will open that database up, and then once it's downloaded, it will you'll get the confirmation message that says that the certificate of authority has been downloaded. Here's a note: if you are running Windows Vista or higher, you need to have, I think that was, yes, it was Windows Vista or Windows 7. You'll need to use iSeries Access at least V6 or 1. Okay, had a client run into that. All right, so what I did in that case, just clicked OK, and then I ran the Verify SSL connection, and it will come up and tell you if you have any errors. Now, once you have that verified, what you need to do is close your iSeries Access box, and when you reopen it, it's going to reopen, and you're going to see this padlock. And now, by default, everything that you run is going to be under SSL. And you know that it's SSL connection because of that padlock. Now there's a couple things you can do. Say that you want to pick and choose which iSeries Access functions use SSL. You can do that. So basically what you have to do is go into the properties of each one of those functions and specify whether or not it's going to use SSL. The default is to use the same thing as iSeries Navigator. So if you do nothing, your ODBC connection, your Telnet connection, and so forth will just come up under iSeries Navigator. But if you don't want them all to do that, and again, if you want to pick and choose, here's some steps to go through. So you basically are choosing which ODBC connection you're going to use, and click on the connection options. This is for ODBC. Configure the security settings. Okay, so you get the options to either not use Secure Sockets Layer, force the Secure Sockets Layer, or use the same as iSeries Navigator. On things like your Telnet connection, what you need to do is go into the Properties box, and when you get the Properties box, again, the default is to use iSeries Operations Navigator, iSeries Navigator, but you can force it also to use Secure Sockets Layer. When you click OK, the port number should change to be 992. If it's not, then you need to force it to be that, because that's the port that listens for the secure Telnet operations. Now, the way to force all users to use a Telnet session that is encrypted is to shut down port 23, because that's the Telnet port that listens with the non-SSL connections. But before you shut that port down, you have to make sure that all of your users have converted to use an SSL connection, or they're not going to be able to Telnet to your system. So notes on Telnet, okay? Once you assign the certificate in DCM, you have to stop and restart the Telnet server to have that assignment take effect. So that's one thing, and that will obviously take a little bit of planning on your part to get that going. And again, to block all non-Telnet, actually that should be all non-SSL traffic, you need to block port 23. Okay, Now, you can also, some of you will use telnet from an iSeries command line. And so you type in telnet to get to another system iBox. So to do that, if you're going to use and need to use a secure telnet session between IBM I systems, you in V6R1 and V5R4 will need a PTF. Now, these are the PTF numbers that actually put that function in, but they have definitely been superseded. But I've listed them here because there's some instructions. You'll want to read the instructions on how to actually use that function on those releases. So those are the original PTFs. Expect to get many more pulled down because they have been superseded. In V7R1, the client telnet SSL function is integrated into V7R1. FTP considerations, if you're FTPing from your PC up to the iSeries and your FTP sessions have to be SSL enabled, you have to have some type of client that will support that. And there's, you can Google that to find out which FTP clients actually support SSL that you can download onto your PC to make that happen. IBM also supports where the iSeries or the IBM I is the FTP client, and will support SSL connections that way. So that both the server function and the client function are integrated. There's also a number of third-party applications. If you have requirements to do secure FTP, there's some other ways that you can do that through third-party or through the Linux functions and that type of thing. So there's some interesting ways to do that. Interesting thing about FTP is that there isn't an alternate port for a secure FTP. So it's not like Telnet where you can shut down port 23. You can't shut down the FTP port and force everything into SSL. So it has to be basically by policy, or again, perhaps you don't even use the IBM I function, you use a third-party function so that you can force the secure connection that way. Now, in your handouts, we're running out of time, and I'd like to leave some time for questions, and we have a rather interesting poll question that we're going to use as you type in your questions. In the handouts, you will get the screen flow for importing a server certificate to another iSeries. So in other words, if you are using your iSeries as a certificate authority and you have 5 iSeries systems, you don't have to configure each one of those to be a CA. In fact, you probably don't want to do that. So you want to choose one of those systems and issue server certificates for your other iSeries systems. So the handouts will include the screen flow for how you request a server certificate for another system and import that into that other system. Okay, so let's take a short poll question, and then we'll open it up for some Q&A.
Okay, if you have questions, please type them into the questions box. But we are doing some research. We do this regularly with our customers and contacts. And today's question is, how often do you check the authority and ownership to database files containing sensitive or confidential data? We'll have about 30 seconds to answer this question. Carol, I will pass the questions over to you. If you get another screen, don't be freaked out. You should have those now. So I think that we can, we've got some great input, so thank you very much. We'll now close the poll. If you would like that information, we have some other information available. Let me just, I'm going to pull the screen back for 1 second, Carol.
Sure.
And then I'll take it back to you. We will answer some of your questions. If we don't get to all of your questions, we will answer them via email afterwards. As you exit today's webinar, you will get a very quick 1-minute survey which will make some special offers available. We do have an upcoming webinar on June 10th on automating your compliance reporting. You can request to be registered by clicking that in the exit survey. We had a very popular recent coffee with Carol a couple months ago on implementing object level security. If you did not see that and would like to get either the recording and or the slides to that, you can click that as well. We also have information available on the new Skyview IBM security compliance reporting turnkey solution that I mentioned at the beginning of the session, where Skyview actually installs, configures, and schedules your reports. So literally all you have to do is watch your email. You can ask for more information, as well as a white paper on laws and regulations and standard, OMI, and the survey results of some of the most common IBM security compliance tasks. So those will be on your exit survey if you'd click that on the way out. So with that, I will pass back to Carol, and I assume you have the questions at this point.